A Fort Vancouver volunteer, named Reggie, emerges from the open front door of the chief factor's house and walks onto the front porch. He is dressed in the style of a gentleman clerk of the 1840s, including wearing a long coat, a vest, a silk cravat and a beaver felt top hat. His clothes are matching shades of brown and cream. He also wears a neatly trimmed white beard. The wood planks of the porch are untreated and have the look of being exposed to the elements. But the house is bright white, with lots of white paned windows contrasted by black shutters. Above Reggie's head, a mature grapevine arches over the scene. He stops walking to talk directly to the camera at the edge of the porch. Reggie uses many animated hand gestures to emphasize the points he makes.
Bonjour, hello, Giagwitch, hello, aloha. My name is Reggie. I'm a volunteer with the National Park Service here at historic Fort Vancouver. From my hat to my shoes, I'm dressed as a gentleman clerk of the Hudson's Bay Company in 1845. My 5 opening greetings gave voice to the major groups of people who lived and worked here during that time period. French Canadian, English, Irish, Scottish, and Hawaiian. Founded way back in 1670, with headquarters originally in London, England, the Hudson's Bay Company was, and still is, a major corporation with international reach. Although today it's a Canadian company based in Toronto, the Hudson's Bay Company remains the oldest corporation in all of North America. When Fort Vancouver was christened on March 19, 1825, the Hudson's Bay Company was a British fur trading company. And the number one fur at the time, the most sought after, the most valuable, was beaver.
A beaver is shown, up close, floating in water. The animal's wet brown fur is matted back, like it had been swimming recently. But at this moment, its eyes are closed and its long-fingered black hands with long black nails are clutched in front of it, holding onto a branch.
Because gentlemen in England, throughout Europe and elsewhere, were wearing beaver felt hats. You'll learn more about furs in the fur store. Right now, we're going to focus our attention on this big, beautiful building called the Chief Factor's House.
The Chief Factor's house is shown at dusk, with a dark purple sky that shows a few stars. The exterior of the house is illuminated with candlelit lanterns, with a candlelight glow also coming from its windows, showing activity inside. From this distance, the house can be seen as big and wide and with a grapevine trellis extending along its large front porch.
Imagine for a moment that you are an American settler.
A black and white drawing of the Fort Vancouver area is shown, from a distance, as if the viewer was on a hill a mile or so away. The scene is separated into 2 sides by the main dirt road near the middle, leading toward Fort Vancouver, and, farther in the distance, Mount Hood. On the right side of the scene is the Fort Vancouver stockade, and the buildings inside, including the Chief Factor's house, near the banks of the Columbia River. A few other small structures can be seen outside of the fort's fenced orchard. On the left side of the road, the fort's large garden can be seen rising up a hill, adjacent to the American military base on the plateau above it.
Who has spent about 6 months walking 2,000 grueling miles on the Oregon Trail. Most likely you're part of a farming family, lured west by politicians and missionaries, poetically promising new opportunities as rich as the soil in Willamette Valley, and a better future, glistening brightly like the snow atop Mount Hood.
A couple of costumed interpreters are shown standing at the open front gate of the fort's stockade. The women are smiling and looking directly at the camera. They are wearing long dresses and beaded necklaces. They have their hands to their sides. In the distance, the fort's bastion can be seen at the end of the palisade wall.
When you finally arrive at the gates of Fort Vancouver, you are physically exhausted, probably sick or injured, and completely without supplies. Then the large wooden gates creak open, and there is the grand Chief Factor's house.
A series of images and video clips of the Chief Factor's house is shown. The first is an exterior view, similar to the view at dusk earlier in this video, only it is daytime. From this angle, the 2 cannons are more prominent. They are black with crimson carriages. And the garden in front of the house, underneath the grapevine, has hints of red blossoms. The second image shows the garden bushes up close. The blossoms, from this distance, look more of a dark pink, with 8 petals, and a yellowish center. Another exterior view of the chief factor's house shows it straight on, as if the viewer were about 30 yards in front of the house, directly in the center. From this perspective, the cannons appear more menacing, as they point toward the viewer, with a triangle-shaped stack of cannonballs in front of each of them. The next 2 video clips emphasize the curves of the entryway staircase. In the first, the camera is brought up the stairs at about shoe height, allowing the viewer to closely examine each stair as they pass by. The second clip is stationary, about halfway up the stairs, at a point that shows curving handrails on each side and the grapevines hanging over the porch and blowing in the wind. The final shot in this sequence is the perspective from the front door, as if the viewer is standing in the door's threshold and looking out. The Indian trade shop is directly ahead. But in between is the stage-like extension of the front porch, which looks like a place to offer a formal address.
What a splendid sight it is. Lovely flower gardens flank not 1, but 2 curving staircases that gracefully lead up to a sweeping veranda with lush green grapevines arching overhead. And of course, there are the 2 eye-catching naval cannons.
The 2 metal cannons in front of the chief factor's house are shown up close and from different angles. The black cannons rest on wooden and crimson painted carriages that have black metal wheels. They each have a pyramid of softball-sized cannonballs in front of them.
Those cannons, however, were purely for decoration. That's right, they were meant to impress, never to be fired. The chief factor's house, as the name indicates, was a house and home for Fort Vancouver's 2 top bosses called chief factors.
A lantern is shown sitting on a wide windowsill inside the chief factor's house. Outside the window, the grapevine-covered porch can be seen. Then, a countertop scene is shown, covered with items from the mid-1800s, including a tea set, covered vases, drinking glasses, and a row of books stacked against a red wall.
In 1845, the east side of the house was home to the number 2 boss, chief factor James Douglas, plus his wife Amelia and their 4 young daughters.
The iconic image of John McLaughlin is shown. He is wearing a dark suit and cravat, against a dark background, which creates high contrast with his bushy white hair and mutton chops, white face, and light eyes.
Dr. John McLaughlin, Fort Vancouver's first and longest-serving chief factor, and who you may know as the father of Oregon, occupied the west side of the house along with his wife Marguerite. Besides being a private residence, the chief factor's house also had 1 room in particular that served as the center for business discussions, religious services, and social activities. Please, come in. Let's take a look back in time.
Volunteer Reggie now turns around and walks into the house. He fades into the darkness of the doorway. And the next scene, which is silent, shows the viewer headed from the hallway into the green-walled dining room. The perspective then flips around and Reggie can be seen walking that same hallway and coming into the dining room, too. Once inside the green-walled room, Reggie stands in front of a long table behind him. It is set for a meal, with dinnerware and glasses in place. There are a couple of black and white framed images on the walls, but they are too far away to distinguish. There also are sconces, with 3 candles in each, on each side of the doorway behind him, and on the wall, near the window.
Welcome to the dining room. This is the largest and most colorful room in the chief factor's house. As you know, 2 families lived in the house, but this was not a family dining room. Officially referred to as the gentleman's mess, it was here that the 2 chief factors presided over the gentlemen of the Hudson's Bay Company as they dined 3 times a day, always discussing company business. The women and children who lived inside of the house were not company employees and thus could not contribute to those business discussions. So they dined separately in the women's mess.
The women's mess is a room painted red, with white trim. It is smaller than the dining room. There is a table set for a meal here, too, with plates, silverware, and serving containers, yet with only 5 chairs around it instead of dozens. The adjacent parlor, also painted red, offers an area for lounging, with a couch and padded chair, and a small card table, with 4 chairs crowded around it. There also is a bookcase in the background and a chest of drawers topped by a tea set.
A small dining room connected to the east parlor on the Douglas side of the house. They received the same food as the men. It was served to them, just in a different location.
Reggie, the volunteer narrator, now walks around the dining room table and shows off its features, including the delicate plates with intricate blue designs on them. The silverware has been set with a spoon and a knife to the right of the plate and 2 forks to the left, with the smaller of the 2 forks on the outside, by the cloth napkin. Each setting has 2 glasses for beverages. There are candelabras in the center of the table, with 3 candles each, near a large silver-topped serving platter. Reggie stops at the head of the table to show where the chief factors would sit. Then he walks to the other side of the table to show where the newest clerks would sit.
Here at this very long table, set with beautiful dinnerware and silver candelabra, the gentlemen followed a very strict seating arrangement. At the head of the table sat Dr. McLaughlin. To his right was Mr. Douglas. Then the gentlemen of the company, primarily clerks, like myself, sat in descending order based upon rank and experience. At the foot of the table sat the newest and youngest clerks, who did not speak unless spoken to. They were expected to listen and learn. It may surprise you to learn that in 1845, both in England and in the United States, it was entirely legal and quite common for children.
A young boy is dressed as a laborer in the 1840s, with a red and white striped shirt, long blue pants, and a colorful stocking hat. He is carrying firewood across a field, inside the fort's stockade, with a large stack of firewood behind him.
Girls as well as boys, to work 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, starting at the age of 9. Wow. Children performed hard labor on farms. They worked in dark, dusty coal mines, crawling through jagged tunnel spaces too small for adults. And they toiled in stifling hot factories, operating extremely dangerous machinery, which far too often claimed young fingers and hands. Here at Fort Vancouver, the youngest person ever to sign a 7-year work contract with the Hudson's Bay Company was Alexander Latty. Born to a Scottish father and a Chinook mother, Alexander signed on to be an apprentice carpenter when he was 11 years old. So, considering the alternatives, the young clerks who sat at the foot of this table had plenty of motivation to listen and learn. In addition to all the business discussions that were held here, on Sundays this room functioned as a church.
A couple of additional perspectives of the dining room are shown, including an image with plates full of apples and pears, before the scene returns to the front porch. In this image, a young woman in a long-sleeved dress is shown looking down from the porch, with an open fan in her right hand, and a white bonnet on her head. The video also shows a photograph of a couple of young people smiling and dancing, in what appears to be a formal style, followed by a black and white illustration of a much more rowdy scene, with candlelit shadows cast against the walls, and a fiddler, in a crowded room.
Whenever visiting missionaries were present at Fort Vancouver, Dr. McLaughlin graciously invited them to conduct church services here. Otherwise, Dr. McLaughlin and or Mr. Douglas would themselves conduct 2 church services each Sunday, one Catholic, the other Anglican. The third function of the dining room was to host festive holiday dances, lavish banquets, and a few weddings, including that of Dr. McLaughlin's own daughter, Eloisa, to company clerk William Glenn Ray. I trust that this brief introduction to the Chief Factor's house has given you some insight to its purpose and functions. So, until you have an opportunity to visit Fort Vancouver in person and hear more of its many, many stories, I bid you adieu.